Okay, Piers Morgan told the U.K Sun newspaper that he's been approached about returning to Good Morning Britain. Of course, you remember he quit after a heated discussion about Meghan and Harry, and he continues to be one of their fiercest critics. Do we think it would be a good move to give Piers his job back?
Well, me personally, no, but like, all of this is it's like right out of the Donald Trump playbook. I mean, this is so Trumpy because he's the kind of guy who can say anything. Like, you remember Trump would always, every 5 minutes, of course, what came out of his mouth was a lie, but he'd be like, so-and-so called me and he loves me. He thinks I'm the greatest ever. And the Boy Scouts called me and said that the speech I gave them was the greatest speech in the history of speeches. And like, you know, these kinds of lies are hard to verify, right? And that's what Piers Morgan is doing right now. It's like, everybody loves me. So-and-so called me and said they totally agree with me and they want me back on their show. Well, who knows whether or not it's true, but it's such a Trumpy thing to do.
And don't you think
the first thing I thought of was I wondered if he was even telling the truth? Because I was like, is that true? Because, wow, if it isn't true, like, let's just play that game for a second. If he just said that, he's still going to force the GMB people to be on the defensive, come up with some kind of response. Maybe even consider this thing. The ratings have been in a terrible slump since he left, which makes you feel like, A, we know he had fans, but if half the people loved him, the other people hated him, that means the people who hated him were hate watching him, but they were still watching. And so if you're a television executive, you know, television is a business. They have to make money, and to make money, you have to have eyeballs. So can you imagine for a second if the executives are like, maybe we do bring him back, we have a stern chatting with him, and we get the ratings back, and let's see if we can actually make something of this. Like, as awful as that sounds, because I wouldn't want to see him back either, you could see the business case to bring him back.
Yeah, but haven't we also seen that polarizing figures in media, whether it's in the UK or even Canada, their employers, if they quit or if they get let go, it's always a little murky. There's never generally one reason. Those polarizing people tend to have a file. Do you know what I mean? So I wonder if his employer is just sort of being like, oh boy, thank goodness we dodged a bullet with that one. This is, you know, we got out of it in sort of a nick of time.
I don't think so. I feel like they were stoking those fires. Like, my understanding is that he was encouraged, strongly encouraged, to be polarizing and to be inflammatory. And I think that they probably delighted in that. His colleagues are another story. Like, obviously, he really upset them. And so imagine for a moment you're the colleague who had to work with that guy every day and you didn't agree with what he was saying. And maybe you confronted him towards the end. And suddenly, if he did come back, like, that's an HR nightmare. Like, how are you going to prioritize other people's feelings? Like, I just can't even imagine how he will be managed if he does return.
Well, remember we talked about it on the show? We talked about the very story that got him fired or he left or, again, like you said, Cyn, we don't actually know what happened there.
Yeah.
But what about the issue? The whole issue around this is racism and mental health. He is the biggest critic, saying things like, Meghan and Harry are playing the biggest victims in the middle of a pandemic. He thinks it's pathetic. Like, I'm paraphrasing stuff that he says. But it's about mental health. We also talked on here about another British journalist who was like, is Harry getting too much therapy? You know, as if that's the problem. And so what does that now mean for what the discourse will be allowed on that show if he came back? And whose mental health will be prioritized? His co-workers? That of Meghan and Harry's. The mental health question here is the conversation of this era. So how he moves, what if he says something so atrocious, he has to get fired again? Like, let's just go down that road for a second. I think this is a ticking time bomb.